Hey Dunchbags, what's going on? It's Landon Remixes here, and welcome to my review of album number 12 from the Norwegian DJ and producer Savant. This one is called Vybz. Now before I get too deep in this review, I would just like to apologize for this giant distracting welt on my forehead. Don't know how it got there. It was probably my fault. A little fun fact, one of the first albums I ever reviewed on this channel was Savant's last album, Invasion. And within that review, I showcased some very strong and mixed opinions about Savant as a person. I probably should have stayed away from that. And honestly, the result of that was a very cringe-worthy review. Luckily, from that point, it took Savant over a year to put out a new album, so I had some time to mature as a critic. And if I'll be honest, I was absolutely hyped to hear this album as soon as I heard it was released. Something that's going to be very central to today's review is the thing that caught my attention originally with the album, which is that the artwork for the album portrays Savant killing a number of eyeless zombie cats, clearly and figuratively representing the label Monster Cat. Now, being an absolutely huge fan of the label, really my goal when I went in to listen to this album was to basically tear it apart for everything it's worth. But after taking a good couple listens through this album, the result is the exact opposite. Although I definitely don't think this album is perfect, I definitely do think it has its flaws, this is arguably Savant's best album to date. In fact, the only honest complaints I have about this album fall within the first 5 tracks of it. Following that, there's not much wrong with this album. I'd say my absolute biggest complaint about this album is the album's intro, which I think honestly flows pretty terribly into the second track, and it seems like this intro was kind of just thrown on to be an intro. Not finding much in the quality of that one, and then we continue into the second track, Boss, which I actually thought the first half of the track was mixed pretty badly, but then I actually ended up loving the second half of this, so my opinions on this track, being one of my least favorites, actually ended up being kind of neutral. This album, for the most part, does have a lot of throwback sounds to Savant's old music, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Especially in the second half of this album, I'm feeling a lot of throwback to his album Protos, which is probably his most experimental album. Really going for that rock and 90s influence, and I really liked what he was pushing with that second half of the record on this one. I'll get more into that in a second, but I do have a couple other small picks with the first half of this record. Both Carnival and Indica, for example, are Complextro flavored future bass tunes, and it sounds like something that almost could have been a Monster Cat reject, kind of leading me to believe that these are the two most self-defeating tracks on the album, if indeed Savant is trying to create an album that destroys Monster Cat as a label. If I were to give a short and straight opinion about this album, I'd say that if Savant would have cut out the first 6 tracks, left Omen, the 7th track on this album, and on from there as an album, this would have made a very solid, probably 9 out of 10 record. In fact, I think Omen would have made a lot better of an intro for the album than the actual intro that we got. With its very heavy electro guitars and heavy and fast-paced drums on this one, it both sounds like an epic intro sequence as well as almost like a final boss to a 90s video game. That one is followed extremely well by probably the most thematic track on the album, the Zombie Cats track, which has the same kind of feel as Omen with its very final boss-esque style. This actually accompanies the artwork extremely well. I can just picture all the zombie cats coming from all directions and Savant just taking them down with his laser gun with this track going on in the background. The thing I'm really happy about this one is the track that's trying to take down Monster Cat the most is the farthest style away from what Monster Cat could be, whereas I feel like the first half of the record before this point was trying to push for a sound that was a little bit too close to where Monster Cat is right now, if that makes sense. And I'm definitely not meaning to say that the second half of this record doesn't have any EDM influence. I just think that the second half has a lot better electronic music than what we're getting with the first half of this thing, given give or take a couple tracks. The track In Your Name, for example, is very flavored with progressive house and new disco and some really soulful vocals. Easily one of the most catchy and easy to get into tracks on the entire record. There's even crazier electronic experimentation on the second half with tracks like Silhouette. I think the only track on the second half of this record that I'm not going absolutely crazy over is the track Troll, which sounds like it could have come straight out of the kind of 8-bit 2012-2013 glitch hop scene. Of course, Savant does come and re-experiment with the chiptune sounds a little bit later in the album. I like the track Enemy Paint a lot, not necessarily for its chiptune infusion, but more so for its drum solo that comes about 2/3 into the track. One of my other big favorites from the album is the track Worship, which I really loved for its very heavy piano and house undertones, as well as its very back and forth glitchy style that goes throughout the track. The album does close on a little bit more of an EDM tone with the track Alive, which although does fit the style more to the first half of this album, ended up being one of my favorite tracks, and here's why. Savant claimed that his next album, Hex, would be a little bit more hip-hop flavored, and this definitely will lead into that well, because I can definitely hear some 90s, 80s hip-hop influence on this track. While it does that, it also does throw back to a lot of Savant's classic sounds with a lot of electro house undertones to this. But I think this track's fusion of genres does bring exactly what he's trying to push forward with this album. Just a very diverse piece, and something that I ended up liking more than just about every other album he's put out. This one is easily my favorite work of Savant so far, and I can say with confidence that his albums are only getting better and better. I liked Zion better than Protos, I liked Invasion better than Zion, and I like this one a lot better than Invasion. That given, for the first time I'm actually very excited to see what Savant is going to put out next. For Vybz, I am feeling a light to decent 7.5 out of 10. If you have listened to this album, let me know what you think about it in the comment section below, and if you haven't listened to it yet, I have the album linked in the description, so go hear it, because this one's actually really good. Anyway, I'm Landon Remixes. I hope you guys enjoyed this review, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.